Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Clint Stone Chapter 9 Break. I must congratulate you two on a job well done. I don't think I've ever heard of 6 beings taking on 1,000 and winning, and you two are to thank for that. General Scow sat behind his desk, face split wide open with a smile. He was not like any of the other military personnel that I had met over the course of my life. While they were serious and stern, Scow seemed to be more open and jovial. It was strange. I did not know much about the military makeup, but I always thought the commanders were tough old bastards who were best avoided. Scow was tough and old, but he was not a bastard, nor did he need to be avoided. Jem has already told me everything that has happened, but I would like to hear it from you. Personally. So, what happened on B.R.E? He asked, her long eyebrows twitching. Well, sir, Clint told him the chain of events that unfolded on B.R.E, telling him everything that he knew. He told him what it was about the suits, about the timing of the ltwz, and the massacre of the swarm at the fans. He was respectful during the whole talk, saying so and speaking differentially. It puzzled me for a moment. I had never known Clint Stone to be all right with another being calling the shots or working under someone. Then I remembered that he had been part of the military on his planet. Before the swerve touched it, I guessed that it must have been comforting to him to be back in something that resembled, even in the slightest, the life he had before. When Clint finished, I told Scar about the attack on the gate, and I made a mad dash through the woods. I left out the part where I surrendered to catch the swarm off guard. I was sure that violated some military code of conduct. I just said that they surrounded us. Jua would not say much, and hopefully Jem hadn't said anything. We hadn't spoken to him since we left B.R.E. He had been too preoccupied with his family on the carrier. Jem had taken Dake and Donal aboard the carrier to help him operate it, and Jua had stayed at the Susan with us on the way back to Aldemir. It was a quiet trip. And then we came back here, I finished. Scow looked on approvingly. You two really are something, he said. I'm glad you joined. Now, a few things before I send you on your way. I try to give my fighters time off after a mission when possible. I find it allows for proper recuperation. As such, you two will have a week until your next mission. This will not be a normal thing, but I am trying to give you as much rest as possible before we ramp up the war. Thank you, sir, Clint said as I echoed him. Scow nodded and continued. Am I correct in assuming that you two have not had your tour yet? We nodded. I'll have someone guide you around the base in the city. City? What city? Scow paused and noticed our surprised faces. He looked at us, his eyebrows drawn together. Suddenly his face broke into another broad smile. You don't know about the city? Oh, your tour should be interesting then. This is good. Jem tells me that you... He looked at Clint. Have developed a suit that is capable of deflecting plasma fire. Take a sample to the tailor, and he can get to work replicating it. That will give us a serious advantage over the Empire. Yes, sir, Clint said. Who is Taylor? Scow waved a hand. He's the one in charge of outfitting our fighters with uniforms and other clothing items. Speaking of which, you do need to get some uniforms. I'll have your guide take you to him. There are several other things you need to know, but your guy can help you with that. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. He waved us to the door. Clint saluted, the index finger that flat on his hand pressed against his forehead. I hurriedly copied him. We left, passing Noramac on the way. He looked tired, his eyes drooping and tentacles limp. In the stone corridor outside of Scow's office, we saw a young Pathuni leaning up against the wall, absently spinning around a thin piece of wood in his hands. Perhaps 6 inches long and 1 inch wide, it was very thin, looking like anything more than a firm grip would snap it. He noticed us as his black eyes seemed to glow with recognition. He pulled himself off the wall, placing a piece of wood in his back pocket. You must be the new fighters, he said. Now that he was closer, I could see that he was not a boy, but a young man, perhaps 18 or 19 years old. His thick black hair cropped short on the sides, but left long on the top and back, with the two braided in a strange pattern I had never seen before, an odd, twisting spiral. At 5 feet, he was an average Pathuni, who, by some weird genetic design, almost reached 5 feet tall. No matter their gender, both Cerberus and his daughter, Lady Knight, were 5 feet tall as well. Once they all would have been eye level. Now that I had grown through some mysterious reason, I had to turn my head down to see them up close. "That's us," Clint said. The Bethune put out his hand to shake. I gripped it and shook. His grip was firm. Clint shook it as well. The Bethune stepped back and studied us with interest. I could feel his gaze almost looking through me, studying me. The kind of look from those wise in a way of the world, who can read you with a glance. But this was ridiculous. This boy was too young to have that kind of experience necessary for a look like that. "My name is Books," said the Bethune. "I'll be your guide around the base in New Gotham City." "What is this city I keep hearing about?" I asked. "I thought it was just a military base." Books looked at me. His head was just tilted slightly to the side. He laughed. "What makes you think that? Not everyone in the rebellion is a fighter. No, in fact, most of us aren't." He waved his hands around, indicating the whole base. "What you see here is a small portion of the mountain. I'll tell you more about the city after we finish with the base." He turned and walked away. Clint and I looked at each other and shrugged and followed Books. He looked back over his shoulder and asked, not breaking his stride, "Now Scow said that you two want to visit the tailor." "Yeah, that's right," Clint said. "We were also supposed to bring him a suit, so if you could take us to the hangar, we need to pick one up." Books turned down a corridor, his legs carrying him fast enough to keep him ahead of Clint, who took much larger strides than him. I watched, but Books did not seem to take any more steps than Clint. Less, maybe, but he was young and had a great deal of energy, so I shrugged it off, putting it up to the lights and fatigue. The energy of youth, sure thing, Mr. Warfist." "What did you call me?" Clint asked, his voice sounding mildly amused. Books shrugged. "Warfist. That's what the fighters call you, on account of your hand and all." Clint glanced down at his metal hand and said nothing. I was amused. I had my nickname, the Jahan who fights, and now Clint had his own, the Warfist. I thought it appropriate. Books turned down another corridor, and I noticed the strange markings on the intersection again. "How do you read these markings?" I asked the Bethune, and I thought it would be the best to find out how to navigate the base without help. Books glanced up at the wall and then replied, "They'll teach you those later. I'm just going to guide you around the city for today. Here we are." The hangar opened up before us, the ceiling nearly half a mile above our heads. The roughly circular entryway to the hangar, built to shelter the ships that docked here. There was enough room for several hundred ships on the floor, each inside of a marked-off area. Susan sat near the back next to a small white ship of Skillian design. As we walked down the ramps of our ships, I could see several beings dressed in dark grey jumpsuits wandering amongst the ships, inspecting them, clipboards in hand. I asked Books about them. "They're the repairers," he said. "They look over the ships after every flight to make sure that there's nothing that's broken or needs repairing." As I watched, one of the beings, a short Maroc female, seemed to find a defect on one of the ships and whistled to another to the repairers, and they came running. Clint watched with interest as well until they passed from sight. Susan was just ahead, and as we approached, I could see Books staring at her, as if trying to commit every detail to memory. "She's beautiful," he said, "but I don't recognize the design. What of yours?" Clint smiled, glad someone appreciated Susan as much as he did. "She was a mentor's personal craft, but I fixed her up a bit, gave her a new core and made a few adjustments." Books whistled slowly, looking over every inch of the ship. He walked around her, bending close to look at the details, and then stepping back to get a full view. "You really put some work into her. Any chance at seeing the workings? It looks like there's a few custom additions to the engine. I can't tell from the outside." Clint looked very pleased to have found someone with whom he could talk ships, and I would have let them talk all day, if we had the time. But we did not have the time. I cleared my throat, breaking them out of ever-deepening conversation. "This is interesting, but we have places to be." Clint looked like a child whose favorite toy got taken, but he nodded glumly. Books started, realizing that he was supposed to be doing a job. Clint lowered the ramp, and we climbed aboard into the bay. I saw Books's jaw drop as he stared into the projects in various stages of completion around the bay. "Did you make all of these yourself?" he asked, a hint of awe in his voice. Clint smiled. Yep." Books shook his head in awe. "You're definitely going to be an inventor." Inventor? What do you mean? I asked as I rummaged around in a bin, looking for a suit not too soiled with swerve blood. Ah, here we go. You two really are new, Book said. He held up his hands defensively when Clint and I looked at him. I did not mean that as a bad thing. It's just that, I'm going to have to tell you a lot. As for the inventors, that's going to require a bit of explanation. So grab your stuff and we'll get on our way. We did so, and walking down the ramp through the ship a lot and into the main tunnel. Books was walking a whole way because the rebellion is a very complex organization and there are only so many personnel. Each fighter has a hobby during his downtime to keep the rebellion running smoothly and to prevent fighters from getting bored. Some cook, some build weapons, and some train the recruits. Others are volunteer police force in the city. The inventors build new stuff for the rebellion to use. You'll fit right in. That was interesting, and it made sense. The rebellion couldn't have all their fighters out in the field all at once, so they needed something to do with them. Advancing the resources and well-being of the rebellion was a good task for them. This area is the medical wing. The physical and mental health of the fighters is dealt with here. The city has its own medical facilities. We walked through the area where Clint and I had been examined for our physical evaluations. Mine was never finished and I hadn't even started my mental eval. I wondered if I would ever get that done. We walked into the reception area and I saw the same Iorian behind the desk from the time that we'd first been there. This is where you should come if you need any medical attention, the book said. They do a good job here. He waved at the Iorian with a grin on his face. She blushed and gave him a little wave back. Some better than others, it seems. Dedex, I hadn't expected you back for a while. I turned at the mention of my name and saw Bahone standing in one of the doors leading inside the clinic. He held up a clipboard in his hand and there was a Raccoon behind him, who had clearly just come from the appointment. Bahone said something to the Raccoon, and he nodded and left waiting area, and hurried over to me. I have the results of your test back, he glanced around. Perhaps it would be best if we spoke in private? There was only Clint and Books in the room, not counting the first at the desk. I'm fine, I said. Well, maybe not. I turned to Books. Do you think that you could give us a little privacy? Good thing, boss, he said as he backed away, heading for the nurse. Bahone sighed. We ran every test that we could think of, and that would tell us anything about why you were so impossibly big. We didn't find anything. It took a moment to register. What? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. I was freakishly tall and big for a Jahan, so big that it was actually physically impossible, and Bahones had just told me that he didn't know why. There is nothing that we can do to detect or explain your growth. No drugs, no rare genetic syndromes, no nothing. We even checked for nanites. Given your company, we found nothing. But there seems to be no side effects, so I don't see the need to be worried. No need to be worried. Right. Like I was worried that I was a genetic impossibility. Will I keep getting bigger? I asked, hoping the answer was not what I feared it was. We don't know. Crap. But based on what we've seen so far, no. We don't think you will. At least, not taller. Your musculature can still get larger, but that's basic science. But you seem to have leveled out. Thank you, I said. That's good to hear. Bahones glanced at his wrist. Well, I have an appointment. If you do have any questions, I'll be around in the next month or so until I head back to the field hospital. I nodded, my mind still processing what Bahones had said to me. There was no reason behind it, no explanation, but I was 5 feet, 8 inches Jahan who weighed 180 pounds. In terms of size of my species, I was off the charts. I was so far off the charts that I'd broken through the ceiling and sailed off into space. But I felt fine. Whatever had done this to me did not seem to do anything else. I was grateful, in a way, because of the increase in my size, and therefore strength allowed me to fight the much higher level than I would have been able to before. We passed through more winding passages and came to an area where we had gone for combat with Croat. This is where the recruits train and the fighters maintain their skills. In the area through there, Books pointed at the white tunnel, are the barracks. When you are training or on duty, that is where you will sleep and spend your free time. When you are on leave or break, a house will be set aside for you in the city. Enough about the base, Clint said. You'll get to know it rather well in the future, I expect. Show us this damn city you keep talking about. Books looked resigned to the fact that he would not be able to finish his tour around the base. His voice did not show it, though. Very well. Will you please follow me? He led us back to the main tunnel, passing several brigands along the way. They were dressed in the blue uniforms of the rebellion, and they watched us walk by. They seemed to recognize us, and it wouldn't be very hard. We were fairly well known in the galaxy, with all of the exploits that we've been through. Plus, Clint is one of the biggest beings that they'll ever see in their lives, and I'm freakishly large, Jahan. Books kept walking in the main tunnel, deeper and deeper into the mountain. The floor had a slight slope to it, not enough to feel awkward while walking, but enough for water to run down without pooling. We walked about 20 minutes, even deeper into the mountain. Clint and Books having a detailed discussion about the improvements Clint had made to Susan. A gust of wind blew up the tunnel from the deep within the mountain. It carried with it a smell of, bread? I was not expecting that. I should have smelled rock, musty air, water, too long underground, the things you'd expect from caves. But I smelled fresh bread, a grainy smell heaven to my nose, which had smelled metal and blood for far too long. The tunnel ahead seemed to widen, and I could not see the sides anymore. A faint light was glowing at the end of the tunnel, growing brighter as we drew closer. The ceiling disappeared over us, and we stood on the edge of an enormous cavern, easily 50 times larger than the hangar above us. It was so wide that I could not see the other side. Even with the light coming in from the ceiling, I could see the massive pillars jutting up from the bottom and pushing up against the roof, holding it in place. As I looked up, I saw the top of the gargantuan cavern within 50 feet of the ledge that we found ourselves standing on. It glowed with a bright yellow color, the color of the sun. This close, I could see that was not the entire surface that glowed, but veins of transparent material running through the dark rock. I looked down and saw the floor of the cavern was over 2,000 feet below us, reachable by a broad ramp that cut back and forth across the face of the cliff that we were standing on. In a basin formed by the walls of the cavern, which was easily a dozen miles wide, there was a city. It was huge, formed of stone buildings that looked like they had been carved out of the cavern itself. They spread across the floor as far as the eye could see and farther. And the towers and sprawling complexes formed the structures, with streets cutting between them, lined so straight they looked like they had been cut up by a razor. I could hear the faint noise of millions of beings going about their daily lives below, a murmur of speech, the sounds of engines and machines running in an industrial sector. I said the only word that seemed appropriate. Whoa. Brooks smiled and looked like a proud parent. Welcome to New Gotham City. Let's go down, Clint said. I'd like to finish our tour and get some sleep. Brooks looked mildly disappointed that Clint did not react to the sight of the miraculous city, but he led us down. The way down turned out to be a massive metal plate, easily 50 feet across, that traveled up and down the face of the cliff. The ramp was still functioning, and Brooks said that it was used for emergencies when the lift was down. It took a full 30 minutes to walk up or down all of the ramps, and that was if you were feeling good. It took the lift 7 minutes. The farther down the cliff we went, the more detail I could see the city. It was enormous, one of the biggest cities I'd ever seen, and it wasn't part of a city cluster. And it was in a mountain. The engineering required to create such a marvel had to be incredible. I could see how the city had been built around the pillars holding up the ceiling. There was a space around the base of each, filled with fountains and vegetation, which must have gotten the nourishment from the light emitting by the ceiling, and statues. There were parks set into the bustling city, pockets of peace in a sea of chaos. Book gave us an audible tour as the lift lowered itself to the ground. You can see that grey area over there, the right of the industrial area. That's where the guns, uniforms, and other equipment for the fighters are made, and the various items needed for the non-combat work, like computers, transport, and machines. That's where we will find Taylor. This smaller part is the middle business sector. Everything that's not industrial you can find there. The markets, the banks, the thousands of other little things you think that you wouldn't need, but you do. And the library. Book smiled at this. That's my favorite place in the whole city. It's not a grand building, but they had some books in there that you can't find anywhere else in the galaxy. How did you build all of this in just 20 years, I asked. The rebellion had only been going for 20 years since Scow had refused to surrender to the Empire. They couldn't have built it sooner than that. Books looked around and laughed. The rebellion didn't build this. They just settled it for their purposes. It was built by some very old civilization, one that isn't around anymore. Left word as it traveled down the cliff face, it made much more sense that the city hadn't been built by the rebellion, but rather repurposed to its needs. But that raised several more questions. Clint asked one of them, "What civilization?" "We don't know, actually, which is strange. Usually you'll find some trace that you can tell who was here before. But here isn't anything. There are statues in the parks, but they don't give us much information. They are very detailed. They are just statues of the rest of the races. There aren't any statues of the race that built this place. We know that they aren't one of the known races because their architecture and their languages are completely different than any other race." "I thought you said there were no trace of them. Where did you find the language?" I asked, and I realized the answer as soon as I asked the question. "From the markings in the base," Book said, the answer I'd expected. "You know a lot about a lot of things," Clint said. "Ships, lost civilizations, what else? Where do you learn it all?" "From the library," said Brooks. "I try to know everything that I can about the galaxy. It makes it much more interesting." The lift slid softly into the platform at the base of the cliff, and we climbed off, passing several Sithans and Fenrir. They looked like fighters, and I assumed that they were on their way back from break. Books led us into the industrial sector. A faint haze filled the air above our heads. Books kept up constant chatter of how many stars the Ursa system had, and when certain plants bloomed, and every other little tidbit under the sun. He also threw several facts about the city as we passed by several large buildings. "Those are the rifle factories. One over there with the energy generator is for the city. See, the wires coming out the top? Those carry enough energy to incinerate you in less time than it takes to Unknocked to catch its prey." And he carried on, not letting Clint or I get a word in edgewise. I did not really mind. Some of the facts were really interesting, and Book seemed excited to share them. A low, sprawling building came into view, constructed from the same rock and metal mixture that the rest of the buildings I'd seen. Book said that no one had been able to quite figure out how it had been made, but he didn't know that it was an incredibly strong material, capable of withstanding great pressure and enormous force. "This is the tailor," Book said. The building lacked notable features, but there was an air about it that made it seem very remarkable. Books marched into the large front door and swung it open. We followed him into the large room. It was a bare, empty room with a glass back wall. Through that wall, we could see a vast area covered in long lines of machines, running from one end of the cavernous room to the other. I could see the parts moving in the frantic rush to produce fabric that spilled out of the other end, piling into large baskets that were then taken by several workers into another room through the door set into the far wall. The noise was deafening. A deep whirring and a thrumming filled the air, coming from the machines. The metallic clatter of the cogs and springs could be heard, multiple by hundreds of machines. Books smiled. He seemed to do that a lot. "Here comes the tailor," he shouted, making himself heard all over the racket. Through the door set into the side of the waiting room that we found ourselves in, walked in a middle-aged Quantum, his ears wrapped in a thick cloth material and graying fuzz in his feline face. He waved at us and motioned for us to follow. He led us through the short hallway into a small room. When compared to the room that we'd just seen, filled with tables and workstations, there were machines much smaller than the ones at the work floor, resting on the ground in between the tables, and on top of them, spools of cloth and material hung on the wall. The other three had 100 different sheets of paper, each with thin lines of writing, noting what I did not know. The room was also considerably quieter than the waiting room. When the tailor shut the door, all the sound was cut off from the outside. Considering the amount of noise, it was a very impressive feat. It must have been something to do with the rock metal walls. Taylor unwrapped his ears and left the length of cloth on the nearest table. "Pardon the mess," he said. His voice was a soothing mix of rough and soft. "But I'm on the verge of discovering the correct composition of a material that'll allow for nearly 100% retention of body heat, while being no thicker than your shirt there." He pointed at Clint's red shirt. Taylor moved closer, tilting his head slightly as he peered at Clint's shirt. "That's a particularly nice shade of red. Very rich. Where did you get it?" Clint chuckled, a low sound that did not convey humor. The red is from the bloodstains. I only wear red shirts, otherwise the stains ruin them. Oh. Taylor's eyes widened, but they did not seem shocked. I must write that down, he murmured under his breath at a level that we were not meant to hear. Books cleared his throat, obviously hearing it as well. These are the guys who made the suit that can deflect plasma. Well, Clint added, it doesn't deflect so much as absorb it. Taylor's eyes widened again, this time with surprise. Wonderful! I've been searching for a material like that for a while. Give it here, he said, stretching out his arms, fingers grasping. I handed the suit that I had been carrying since the hangar, rubbing my arm. It hadn't been heavy, but the slightest weight would feel like a boulder carrying it for so long. Taylor made a soft noise of excitement and laid the suit on the nearby table. He ran his hand over the material, feeling every inch of it. When he was finished with that, he carried the suit over to a large machine with a raised platform and a narrow tube looking down at the platform. It was a microscope, but of the type I had never seen before. The tailor laid the suit down on the platform and peered through the eyepiece, muttering all the while. Clint ground his teeth at the delay. Excuse. Books cut him off with a finger over his mouth. Clint seemed taken back. No one touched Clint Stone without his consent. Not those who wished to have the unbroken bones. But this young Bertuni had acted as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Don't interrupt him. He's at work in his own pace. Clint stared at Books, and Books didn't seem too intimidated by the glare that had reduced stronger beings to submissive huddles. Clint sighed and turned his attention back to Taylor. I did as well. At that moment, he was sliding the strange-looking instrument over the suit. It beeped. Wonderful! Truly wonderful! He said, the Quantum rubbing his hands together. You have managed to create a fully functional IPDM. I have been searching for this for years, and I've never even come close. IPDM, ionized particle dispensement mesh, said Books, is a highly conductive material that was theorized to be able to disrupt plasma shots, rendering them inert. Anyone who possessed it would be impervious to plasma shots. Of course, no one could test it because they couldn't make it. They aren't fully impervious, Clint said. They can be oversaturated and fail. Ah, the tailor said, but that is a far cry from a single shot getting you. I've made material that can withstand a few shots, but this can withstand hundreds before failure. This will revolutionize warfare, and we've got it. He sounded positively gleeful. I could see why. With the IPDM, the rebellion could march straight into the swarm and not be harmed. Only for a little while, and in combat, every second counts. Taylor waved his hand. Now go about your business. I gotta go figure out the way to produce these. He turned his suit and seemed lost in a different world. I glanced at Books, and he shrugged. He does that, Books explained. Only focuses on a single thing at a time. If this interests his peak, we should probably get going. Wait, hold on. His belt beeped, and Books pulled out his communicator and put it to his ear. Okay, yes, I understand, sir. He looked up. Sorry to cut your break short, but something's come up. We are going back to the top. Scow wants to see you. End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip, or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.